Hi, everybody. My name is Yashasvi Sorolia, and I am the deputy convener of the Debating and Literary Society. We're having a general equity briefing today. So first of all, I welcome you all. Thanks for showing up. And I think we can start now. Before we begin, I wanted to give a couple of disclaimers. So the first one being that there will be mentions of discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, race, caste, religion, mentions of transphobia, mentions of harassment and assault in this briefing. It's purely for educational purposes, that I can reassure you. Second is that I will be making certain analogies at certain points of this briefing. However, the intent of those analogies is not to belittle any lived experiences or any traumas. It is only to ensure that what we're trying to convey through the policy and what we're trying to convey through this briefing is easily understood in the most accessible language possible. And that brings me to my third point about the theme of this briefing, which is largely accessibility. So I understand that, first of all, most of you have not essentially been to college offline, which means that you've also not been to offline debating tournaments. And we thought that as a committee, it's very important that we equip you with the correct tools and we equip you with the rights that you need to know about yourself, especially when in context to debating. So I will be at certain points using informal language, but the same is only to make sure that you can understand what I'm talking about, since equity policies and things like that usually tend to have very legal language that can sometimes not be very easy to comprehend. At any point of time, if you have any queries or if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you want them to be anonymous, you can direct message them to me. And yeah. So the purpose of equity within our committee. Now, debating in itself is a very informal activity, if you haven't realized it yet. We don't essentially operate like how mooting does or how, say, like ADRC does, things like that. So while we understand that it is a space that allows you to not have to be in the formal restraints, that also makes it a little bit more vulnerable. So it is very essential for us as a committee to make sure that people belonging to all diverse groups while debating are allowed to feel comfortable and allowed to feel safe. Because a lot of times when you're debating, you can talk on issues that are quite sensitive, they're quite contentious. And the main aim of an equity policy is to make sure that while you're talking about these issues that may be sensitive to you, you are in a respectful and safe environment and you're treated with dignity. So the purpose of equity, and I'm sure you know what equity means since we're all law students, but it essentially in this context of this briefing means that everybody, no matter what sort of background they are from, should have a dignified experience when they are debating. So even though it is not possible to ensure that everybody gets the equal treatment, because that's just simply not something that your lived experiences, that your minority identity will allow you. But it's important that as we have rules in place to make sure that if there are certain occurrences which are allowing you to not feel safe, which are allowing you to not feel respected as an individual, then we can resolve those complaints and we can prevent those sort of violations. So there are certain tools of equity to uphold how you ensure that there is equity within whatever it may be, a tournament, a debate practice, etc. So the first one being the constitution of our committee. Now, this constitution covers not only all debate practices that you may have, but it also covers members, so including core members. So if you are on the batch of 2026 group, you are covered within the ambit of this. Our constitution isn't really concise in what the rules of equity are, but it is a sort of precursor, because every time we have a tournament within the college, say, for example, intra-AP or freshers debate, we make a specific equity policy on the basis of those ideals of our constitution. We also make a separate one for the GLC debate. That's not us though. We appoint an equity panel, they make a policy. And then any tournament that you will go to as debaters, they will have their own external tournament policies, which will be called an equity policy headed by an equity panel. So it is very, very important that you know that any sort of debating space that you are in, it is protected by these rules. So for tournaments in particular, the scope of equity will include debaters, adjudicators, core adjudicators, members of the organizing committee, TAP team, observers, and members of the equity team. So if you may not know, we're having GLC debate very, very soon. And I'm hoping that all of you guys will be there to help us out with organizing it. And when that happens, you will most definitely be included in the scope of whatever policy that is drafted. In terms of our own internal policy, as I had mentioned before, so if you are participating in a debate practice that has been arranged through a debating WhatsApp group that has our official name on it, then you are, I'm sorry, has somebody unmuted themselves? Okay, just move on. Yeah, so if you are participating in a debate practice that has been organized through DebLitSoc, then you are within the scope of our policy. If you are a member of the Debating and Literary Society, so if you had given an interview and you had received an email of confirmation that you are a member, then you are included within the scope of this. This also includes core members, which is me, Ray, Lily, and you might know our junior core as well, Aditya, Lavleen, Neeti, Srishti, Shruti. I don't know if all of them are here. Palak, Ray, all of them are included as well. And any mediums of official DebLitSoc communication. So this means WhatsApp groups, this means emails. If we have a Discord channel for our tournament, that too will be included within the scope of equity. Now, the main purpose of any equity policy will be to ensure that there is no discriminatory conduct. And I have listed out 8 very common ones for you. These are not, so not all of these are mentioned in our own internal policy, but any tournament policy that we have and any external tournament policies as well will always have these 8. So they include bullying, ragging. Bullying, ragging is in very general terms what it means. So if you are using a certain protected attribute, and I will get to what protected attribute really means. If you're using that to bully somebody, or you are a girl, you can't debate, sort of a thing, that is discriminatory conduct. Direct discrimination would be something like, say, for example, I'm an adjudicator and I do not allow somebody to qualify because they are a woman. That counts as direct discrimination. Indirect discrimination would be if I hold an official event on, say, a holiday of a minority group. So for example, if a debate tournament, after admitting, say, participants, it decides that it will have an important event on, say, Eid. What that does then is that it excludes people who would participate in Eid to go ahead and participate in the tournament. That is indirect discrimination. Violence is, it's not possible online, but if you do go to an offline debate, violence includes, of course, hitting somebody, any sort of physical violence. Harassment is, again, using any sort of protective attribute to harass somebody. This also includes sexual harassment. Um, Victimization means that if somebody is a victim, say, for example, if I am that woman who was not qualified by an adjudicator because he did not want to qualify me because I am a woman, he can then not go ahead and say things about me like, oh, she's a woman, she's bad at this, that's why she can't think analytically, she's very emotional in her adjudication. So you're not only discriminating against me, but you're also making a show out of the fact that I'm a victim. That's victimization. And vilification is essentially villainizing a certain community. For example, if you say that uh, all women actually hate men, and in this debate, I will prove to you that all women essentially want bad things for men. If you can understand what I'm saying here, it just means to make generalizations. And I will get to what generalizations also means. These are the protected attributes that I mentioned earlier. So age group, caste, culture, and identity, disability, gender identity, infectious disease, intersex status, marital or relationship status, mental health status, sexual practices or experience, political affiliations, beliefs or ideologies, pregnancy or personal experiences of abortion, race, color, descent, origin, religious affiliation, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and background. Now, I will explain to you why it's very important to have these protected attributes. And I'm going to use an analogy here that's a little bit bleak, but bear with me. It's just to make you understand that it's not easy for everybody who comes from a minority group to always participate in a debate. So, for example, say you, when you were a kid, were bit by a rabid dog, okay? And when that dog bit you, it happened in a market and it was very painful. And then you had to go through um, a lot of medical bills, and it was not a fun time, basically. And then what happens is that a few years later, you are at a debate tournament and you're having a debate about uh, dogs biting people. Okay. And this is something that you've lived through. Okay. This is something that has happened to you. And you're in a room where nobody essentially has had a dog bite them. And everybody's talking about how it's like this, it doesn't really matter. It's just a dog. I'm sure it didn't hurt that bad. And you in your head are thinking it hurt really bad and it was really humiliating. And it it was very scary for me. I still sometimes, can't really be comfortable around dogs. While other people are just going on and on about things like, but dogs are actually really nice, dogs are very friendly. It must be your issue. You must have given it a signal that you're scared or anything. And at that point, I hope you can imagine that for this person who has gone through this experience, it becomes really hard to engage in debate because it is something that is emotionally connected to you. So it has something that has essentially traumatized you. And a lot of times when you are somebody who is from a minority group or who is somebody who isn't necessarily from things that qualify you as a privileged person in society, there are a lot of experiences that you have that essentially make it difficult for you to talk about these things. For example, if there is somebody who is a closeted gay individual and you're having an LGBTQ themed debate, at that point, it is difficult for them to engage in discourse without having their feelings affect them. And although debating is a sport, it is an academic activity, it is still important that it is humane. So obviously, they are allowed to engage in this debate. You are allowed to attack their arguments, but not in a way that dismisses their experience. This does not mean that this gay individual can then say, no, this is my experience, and that's why that makes me win the debate. But what is essentially expected of you here is to understand that you have to be sensitive with regards to these things, especially if you are somebody who does not belong to a minority group, because you will essentially never know of their experience. There's a certain general conduct that is expected and encouraged out of anybody who participates in a debate practice. One of them being that you should be read with the respective equity policy of the space you are in. So if you're going to a tournament, make sure that you read their equity policy. If you're here, we will soon circulate our own equity rules that you can read and make sure that you follow them. The second one is refrain from distracting or disrupting other participants while they are speaking. Now, all of these are not necessarily punitive, but this is just something that we expect out of you. Refrain from trying to cut people off. This, I don't know if this happens as regularly as online as it did offline, because online we have mics and we have raise hand, but just to be respectful, accept the decision of the adjudicators in good faith. And if you have any questions regarding that decision, you should ask them after they've completed their OA, and you should not become hostile about it. So for a lot of debaters, it can be difficult to accept certain decisions. Maybe you did not particularly agree with the analysis of the adjudicator. Fine, you include that in the score that you give them. But it's not always expected, it's not always fine to go ahead and berate them for it, because if they can sit and listen to you speak for like 7 minutes each individual and not be mean about it, then it is also expected out of you to be nice to your adjudicator. Refrain from insulting or non-constructive commentary on each other. So if somebody has not asked you for constructive feedback, don't give it. This also correlates to the fact that a lot of times people in debates will give constructive criticism within their speech. So for example, if somebody says, I don't know where you've learned debating from, but this is not a valid argument, that would essentially be a violation. So it essentially attacks somebody's socioeconomic background. I think this had happened to me, Lily and Tushar in a debate tournament where we were told something like this about where are you from, how are you debating like this? And we had gone ahead with an equity complaint, because the fact is that we are from a state-funded college and we don't always have the same resources as, say, a private college does. And that's why it's important that even when you're making speeches, you should be cognizant that you're attacking their matter and not the individual. All persons should refrain from insulting, non-constructive commentary on speeches, speakers, and adjudicators, both within and outside of debates. This includes on social media, in live feeds of the debate, comment sections, and group chats. So this is something that I have to point out time and again, because we are online. First of all, you cannot record people without their consent. So if you're making an Instagram video for your story or taking a picture and the person is being recorded without them knowing that they're being recorded, it could count as an equity violation if they decide that this is not okay. So make sure that if you are shooting somebody, you ask them before. This also includes observers. So if you are having a debate practice and you don't necessarily want observers, you can say that you are not comfortable with it. It's up to the observers if they really want to be there. They can have a chat with the speaker, or if other speakers can maybe perhaps do something about it, then you can do that. But it's general practice, just ask before you take a step. Also refrain from heckling during rounds. this essentially heckling, what heckling is that if you are in a debate room and somebody really wants to ask you a POI and they raise their hand and you say, I'll take your POI later, and they keep raising it. And you're like, I'll take your POI later. And then they stand up and they're like, please take my POI. That's heckling because it's not allowing you to properly speak because you're just so distracted by whoever it is that's asking you a POI. So don't heckle. This is general conduct with respect to language. So language can be very complex when you're debating. And in your head, when you're thinking of something and how you execute it and how you interpret it can be different. What this means is you might not be somebody who is racist, but sometimes because you are in the moment and you're debating, you say something that you did not necessarily intend. However, it is important that you know that it does not matter what you intended if what you said affected somebody. So if somebody in the room felt essentially attacked by a racist comment, then it will be their context that would be more important than yours. So it's important that when you are speaking, you are considerate and you think it through when you're choosing words, even outside of debates. So I've charted out a couple of guidelines for you to keep in mind when not only when you're making your arguments, but also when you're making your speeches. The first one being making generalizations on the basis of protected attributes. So this is something that actually happens more often than not, where debaters will make generalizations or stereotypes on the basis of protected attributes. So if I have to take an example, I'll take an example that does not include a protected attribute to make it a little bit more of a candid example. So say, for example, there is a community of Harry Potter fans, okay? And Harry Potter fans are obviously obsessed with Harry Potter and they love all things Harry Potter. And it's a group within society. Think about it this way, like how we have women and how we have men. We also have a group that is Harry Potter fans. And you have a certain debate which includes the subject of Harry Potter fans. And in the room, there is somebody who belongs to that group. While you are having that debate, your debate partner says something like, and we know about Harry Potter fans, they follow J.K. Rowling, who is a known transphobic. So it is obvious that all Harry Potter fans are transphobes. Am I right? This is a generalization. Basically, using one instance to make it a lived experience for the entire community. So you should be careful that you don't do that. This is especially important when you're dealing with motions that include gay people, that include women, that include certain races, that include countries. For example, people very often make generalizations about China. They make generalizations about women in philosophy motions. A thumb rule to go by is if there was a member of that group in the audience, would they be offended by your statement? If your answer is yes, if your answer is maybe, then you chuck that. Second is use of unnecessary graphic language. So all persons should moderate sensitive topics so that any listener who may have had a traumatic experience is not made to feel uncomfortable or painful. So for example, if there is a debate that involves you having to talk about sexual assault, say for example, and instead of saying sexual assault, you use the word rape consistently. And while you are making your speech, you also go ahead and try to describe what rape is graphically. That is bound to make anybody who has had an experience like that a bit uncomfortable. And if it is not essentially important to the debate that you're having, then you should make sure that you are not indulging in such behavior. You shouldn't make personal attacks. So if you know somebody, you shouldn't say things like, something that does not involve the debate, or something that goes beyond the debate room that you might know about them, that might be privy to you. Don't use that information within a debate room. You can't use reclaimed language unless you belong to a group that was historically oppressed by the use of the same. So you absolutely cannot use racist slurs. You cannot use homophobic slurs unless you are a member of that community and you are okay with reclaiming that term and you can use it. You cannot use slurs directed at any individual. So while you are debating, don't say DPM is stupid. That adds nothing to your argument and it is insulting. Attack cases, not individuals. Moving on. Gender pronoun policy. So most tournaments have a gender pronoun policy. Our tournament does as well. We don't necessarily have a gender pronoun policy within the SOC, but we encourage that you follow this. So use gender neutral language as a default. So if you're referring to somebody and you don't know their pronouns, you say they, them. And in debate rooms, it is preferred that instead of calling people by their names or calling people by specific pronouns, so for example, if I'm speaking against Lily, who is the prime minister, and I know she has she, her pronouns, it is preferred that I instead refer to her as the prime minister spoke. You should also refer to the judging panel as panel or chair instead of their names or instead of using a specific pronoun. If you are chairing around or if you're judging around, it is encouraged that you ask everybody in the room if they want to share their pronouns. And if they want to, then you let them share. You can share your pronouns. If you don't want to share your pronouns, you can say, I don't want to share my pronouns. You can also say that you don't want to be gendered. And you can also say that you have no preference. Complaint procedure. So if at any point in time, you feel that there has been a breach of policy during a debate practice or trials or any event that may be associated with our society, then you can raise this matter with a member of the executive council. The executive council is me, Ray, Lily, and a junior core as well. You can also send us anonymous complaints. Usually there is an informal complaint and a formal complaint as well. So an informal complaint can just be you talking about it, and any consequences for it can be informal as well. So maybe you can ask for an apology, maybe you can ask for a written apology, things like that. But if it is a formal complaint, then there is more procedure that is to be followed. So if the complainant wishes to progress with a formal complaint, then we will speak to the complainant. We will ask them of the details of the incident, speak with the debater who has offended, and hear their side of the story. And then we present this complaint to our professor in charge, who basically is the presiding judge, and she determines whether or not a breach of policy has occurred. And at any point of this process, since it's a victim-led process, and a victim-led process means the victim decides whether or not they feel that there has been a violation, whether or not they want to go ahead with the violation. So it's not like taking cognizant effect to any of these violations. It's only when the victim wants to go ahead that we go ahead and engage in any of this procedure. So if they feel that they want to get rid of this investigation, then the investigation ceases and we treat the initial complaint as null and void. That is all. If you guys have any questions, then you can go ahead and ask me now. I'll stop screen sharing.
Right, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Right, you talked about how if in, let's assume that in my argument, I say that the prime minister is stupid. So like, what does the prime minister do in that time? Does he stop the speech and then call for a violation, or like waits for the end of the debate and then goes to the OC? What do I do? Do I inform the runner?
Okay, so it's completely up to you what you want to do about it. As I mentioned, it's a victim-led process. So what you can do is, if you are feeling too uncomfortable to engage in the debate any further, you can say, I actually am not feeling comfortable and I'm going to have to withdraw from this debate right now. And then you can text anybody from the executive council. You can also text the adjudicator, because usually the adjudicator has a record of what everybody has been saying and they have been listening intently, so they know. If you're at a debate tournament, then you can ask the runner to stop the time. And you can, usually there's an equity panel at every debate tournament, and they have their ways to reach them, and they have their forms. So you can use them to go ahead and file an equity complaint. If it is something grave, then definitely you should go ahead and ask to be withdrawn. But if it is something that can be dealt with after the debate round, then you can take a decision upon that based on what you and your partner think, like your debate partner think is best. So you can go ahead with the round, and then after the round is done, you can go ahead and take up an equity complaint, or you can exit midway. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I had a question, like if we are the adj in a room and someone tells that they want to raise an equity complaint, like in the middle of the debate, do you pause the debate and contact the equity team, or do you wait for the debate to end? Because like this happened with me in one of my debates.
All right. So at this point, you can ask the person who is claiming that they have been violated. So you can ask them if they want to go ahead with the debate, or you can ask them, do you want to stop this debate right now and contact somebody to intervene?
Okay, so it completely depends on the person.
Yeah, it's not like the adjudicator has to make a decision then and there about whether the debate goes on or not. It's about the victim. If they don't want to participate anymore, they can excuse themselves. You can, if they excuse themselves, you can even ask the other people if they want to go ahead with the debate, Iron Man or something. Or I think the best thing to do here is just to ask around, like, what do you guys want? And especially ask the victim how they want to proceed.
Okay, thanks.
I'm actually going to stop recording so that you guys can ask questions.